Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Opti TV at home. In this episode, we're going to be chatting with Brian Holloway, the sales manager for McLaughlin Boatworks, the largest Opti manufacturer in North America. We're going to be getting to know him and his story a little bit, what it's like to be a vendor and a manufacturer in the class, as well as what it's like to drive those big trucks all the way around the country for the Opti circuit. But first, I want to give a shout out to McLaughlin for supporting the first ever Opti TV giveaway. I think it was really cool for them to participate in the way they did. I hope the winner enjoys their new Team McLaughlin kit. Let's get into it. So we're here with Brian Holloway from McLaughlin Boatworks. We're going to be chatting to him about McLaughlin, Opti manufacturing, and more. Our first question today, Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well. We're at the office. We're still making boats, still preparing for regattas, even though they're pushed out a little bit, and creating some content for people. So some information.
Yeah, you guys have been doing some really interesting social media work, and as I understand, you have a new website.
We've updated our website. We've put a blog onto our website, which has a lot of good technical information on it. So that's hopefully a good resource for the class and for sailors. I mean, we've got 30 years worth of Opti building experience, so we've learned a lot about the boats over the years.
Yeah, most definitely. We definitely are going to be getting into a little bit of the history of Opti manufacturing in the U.S., but a lot of people see you around the circuit or at all these big championships, a little smaller events. But for those that don't know who you are, Brian, how did you get into sailing?
Well, the story goes that Dad couldn't find a babysitter, so I was a couple weeks old, and he strapped my little cradle to the mast underneath the Sea Scout deck, and I went for my first sailboat race. Apparently, I cried for about the first 30 minutes and went to sleep.
So they got you pretty early.
Which, I mean, is also about how most of my races go these days. I cry for the first 30 minutes and fall asleep.
Well, I mean, I know that doesn't necessarily carry into your passion for boat building and the Opti class. But let me ask you, when you were growing up sailing, did you have a coach?
Yeah, we had local coaches. We didn't have the type of coaching at the level that we see in the Opti class pretty often now, but we did have some great coaches who, again, were my coaches when I was a kid, and then I also got to sail with again as a young adult. And learn almost a second time from them.
So you kind of came through the community sailing model a little bit.
Yep. Some of the people who are buying boats from me now are their kids. Those people were my instructors, and they're buying boats for their kids now.
Did you sail Optis when you were a kid?
Yeah. I actually had a wooden Opti that was built by my great uncle, is the story, and it came down to me, and it went around the neighborhood for a few years, letting all the neighborhood kids learn how to sail in it. And then I got it back a few years ago. It's actually behind my house. I'm trying to refinish it so my nephew can learn how to sail with the same boat that I did. And then I might have taken a bit of it for myself. So I took a bit of the mast and put it in my wedding ring. So I carry it with me every day.
That's an amazing story. So what was your favorite part about sailing when you were a kid?
I love getting together with that group of friends in the summer that I didn't necessarily go to school with or hang out with other times. But that group of friends and learning how to sail, being out in the water, I mean, every single day, you couldn't get me off the water. So I loved every minute of it.
I think that's a feeling that a lot of kids share. And a feeling that a lot of kids share is also when they start getting competitive. When did that happen for you?
Not until a little bit later, about 17. I actually stopped sailing for a couple of years to get my license. I'd done this other project that I was working on. I'd sail with my brothers, and I loved them very much, but they were not the best people to sail with as a young kid. And it kind of lost my love for the sport for a while. But when I came back at 17, started sailing with some great people. And some of them were my former instructors. And since then, it's been full on.
So you had a bit of a family affair when you were coming up, but as I understand, you kind of broke off from the herd and went your own way and started working as a yachty?
Yeah, I knew towards the end of college that I wanted to make my living sailing. I just didn't know how to do it. And I ran into a friend of a friend who used to be in yachting as a crew. And he kind of introduced me to what that would entail. And I moved to Florida with, my little Honda Civic full of everything I owned, and started working on big boats, and did that for about 6 years.
Which is a long time, but something called you back to your first boat, your first love, Optis. And how did you get involved with McLaughlin?
Well, I was part of a crew that brought a 145-foot motor yacht up the river system to Chattanooga, which is a bit of a harrowing journey. And about a month in here, I met my lovely wife, we've been married for almost 5 years now. And she convinced me to stay in Chattanooga. And then McLaughlin figured out that I was in town and started trying to recruit me, because I was a young guy who loved sailing, and I was a perfect fit for the company.
So you've been able to see the entire North American circuit. And for those who don't know, McLaughlin is the only major producer of Optis in the US and North America. With all that perspective and experience, what's the biggest Opti regatta you've seen?
By numbers, actually New England. There's just so many boats up in that area that there was, I think, 400 plus for a New England regatta a few years back. Out of Salem Newport is massive undertaking.
Wow, that's surprising to me, because I would think that the biggest regatta would be Nationals or the Spring Team Qualifier.
Those are both big. They're 200 plus boat events. And it really depends on the location of Nationals. If it's up in the Northeast, that's where majority of the boats are. So we get bigger numbers there. But if it's in a different location, on average, 200 to 250.
Which is not a small regatta, everybody. That does not usually happen in other classes, unless it's a world championship or something like that.
And even rarely then.
That's true. So as a manufacturer, right, you're involved in the actual production of boats, but as a class vendor, what does a typical day look like for you?
On site, it's pretty busy. Up early, immediately interacting with the sailors and the coaches and the parents, trying to make sure everybody's set up for the day. Once they're out on the water, it's getting back and hopping on my computer and doing some office work. And then once the sailors come in, making sure they're set again going into the next day. And then usually meetings with coaches, meetings with parents, whatever it takes to make sure everybody's okay. In the office, we get in the morning, spend about a couple hours getting through emails, knocking out paperwork. Midday, checking in with production staff, making sure all the boats that we're prepped for what regattas are coming up, we're producing in an appropriate time frame. Noonish, back to emails for a couple hours, and then in the afternoon we have what I like to call special projects time, which is doing that extra article about, doing the testing for an article about what spar flexes the most, what sprit flexes the most, and how much that difference is, and what main sheet system has load tolerances, kind of whatever geek sailing project we want to do that we want to get some technical information about.
And I think that attitude really differentiates you over at McLaughlin versus some of the other boat manufacturers, because as the only major North American production house of Optis, you're able to service the boats that you produce and support the class, which I think, in my opinion, has been really critical to the growth of the class over the last 5 to 10 years.
Since we're the largest Opti charter in the world, and one of the largest charters, period, we're constantly testing every piece of equipment on the boat. So if there's anything that we can adjust or change within the rules that would make the boat better, we can bring that back to the factory immediately after an event and start possibly putting that into production boats. So we're constantly updating.
And how involved is the class in measuring and making sure that things that you guys are producing are up to spec?
Very involved. So we have people who live in town here who measure, but they actually work for the class, not for us. But they come into the factory and measure every boat. They have an more in-depth measurement every 10 boats. And then the IOTA, the international class, comes once a year to make sure that our measuring equipment is in spec, that our molds and jigs and everything we use to produce a boat is in spec.
So pretty involved, I guess.
Very involved, yeah.
Which is good to know, because again, for those that don't know, the Opti class is a one design class, but it wasn't always so. Is that correct?
Yeah, 1995 is when they won designed, which was kind of nice. We've been building Optis for about.
And McLaughlin has historically been producing sailboats for a long time, right?
Since the early 70s. We actually started out in California as a company called Chabasco, and then moved here in the mid 70s when the Snipe class, which is what we were primarily building at the time, moved to Chattanooga.
Interesting. Snipes to Optis.
Yep. And windmills, day sailors, Highlanders, even a Thistle or two, I think.
So speaking of McLaughlin Optis, a lot of parents and sailors and coaches, when recommending or looking into buying a boat, right, see the McLaughlin offerings between the club model, the intermediate, advanced, and the pro racer. Can you tell us a little bit about the differences between the four boats?
Sure. The club package, intermediate, and advanced racer package are based off of our World Championship hull. That is our production hull that we send to things like Worlds, things like North Americans. It's primarily what we build. And the packages are based off of the level of equipment that you intend to use the boat for, whether you're club racing all the way up to the advanced racer, which will take you well through a nationals sort of level racing. The pro racer is that final step when a sailor they know they need that last 6 inches of speed to win the race or to win the regatta. And that is the highest end equipment we can possibly put in a boat. Everything between the sails, the spars, lines, hiking straps, you name it, all top end.
So as I understand, speaking of equipment, the black, gold, and Opti Max spar sets, as I understand, there are now 24 different offerings this year between them.
Pretty close to that. There's a lot of different mast, boom, and sprit flexibility options that can be combined. So somewhere between 11 and 12 different combinations per product line.
How does a potential customer or a parent of a sailor even begin to navigate so many options?
Well, that's part of what we try and do here. This time of year, especially during this pandemic, is we try and do testing and provide information so that they can make an informed decision. What will be best for their sailor? We just put out an article talking about the different flexibility of spars and how they are constructed. And we're going to follow that up with the different types of spars. So we'll do one on sprits and one on booms as well, so that people can work with their coach, work with their instructor and their sailor to figure out what's going to be the most advantageous for them. And
we'll be sharing that article and pointing you guys to all that great info on the blog. So Brian, as the sales manager and a man of many hats over at McLaughlin, you've been able to see the class almost from every perspective, as a coach, as a manufacturer, as a vendor. What do you think is so special about the Opti class that keeps kids sailing or brings kids into sailing?
It's a activity where a child can develop on their own confidence, their own reliance, but they can do that within a larger group of friends that are all doing the similar activity. They can help each other learn. So it's a mixture of sort of that solo and team sport that you don't get in almost any other sport. Sailing teaches, as you know, a unique combination of skills that I don't think any other sport does. Again, self-reliance, that self-determination, the responsibility for your equipment, the responsibility to your team and to your coach. That you can get each of those from other sports, but I don't think you can get all of them combined like you do in sailing.
Well said. I definitely agree. And how do you see the Opti class evolving, broadly speaking?
Well, we're in a bit of a bind as a sport, and I think the Opti class is the legs that feed the wolf. I think that if you can continue to grow youth sailing, our sport as a whole will keep on growing. But I think to do that, we have to continue to try and find cost-effective ways to do that, to keep the entry cost to the sport low. And I think we have to make it fun. There's a lot of high pressure at some of these regattas, and I'd like to see us having, and the kids having a lot more fun doing what we all love to do. I mean, most of us are coaches and suppliers are here because we love this sport and we want it to be strong. So let's see what we can do to improve it for everybody.
Are you listening, USODA?
Legs feed the wolf, man. The legs feed the wolf.
Definitely. And one of the reasons that we even started Opti TV was to bring a little bit more attention to what's happening in the Opti class, because a lot of the times the governing bodies of the sport around the world are not as connected with the Opti class as they should be, because here you have a large group of kids that are, growing into the sport and growing older in the sport and wanting more, but the disconnect sometimes is very palpable, and a lot of kids end up leaving because there's no easy pathways for them after Opti sailing.
Yep.
So to that effect, I mean, is there anything you think that from the manufacturer and vendor perspective should be changed in order to facilitate that?
I think we've come a long way since 1995 as far as materials go. And I think we could make a more cost-effective boat that is still as strong and as sturdy. I know that the Opti gets ragged on by some of the other classes and some other sailors for being, a floating box. But the truth is, if you can make this box go fast, you can make pretty much any boat go fast. So while the basic design doesn't have to change, some of the materials that can reduce the cost of producing and therefore the selling cost of an Opti could change and be advantageous for the sport.
Changing gears here a little bit, going back to a more personal perspective, I got some questions from Opti sailors, and they want to know, what's the best part about being a vendor at a regatta and being able to see all these events?
The best part is when you fix something that's broken in a pitch. That's an awesome moment where a kid is about to go out in the water and they realize that something's broken or something's bad, and they come running up and they're nervous, obviously, and they're worried because how's it going to affect their day in the water? And you get to fix that problem for them. You get to be there with them to keep them in a good head space to get back on the water, and then get them ready and get them gone so that they're ready to rock for the day. I mean, you literally feel like a superhero at that moment because you've accomplished such a wonderful thing to take them from a very worried, frantic state to a very calm, I'm going to go kick butt in the water state by fixing some parts and getting them ready to rock.
I think that's a very unique perspective because I think a lot of coaches will share that sentiment with you. And I think that's something that a lot of maybe, dare I say, parents don't get to see, because at regattas it can be a kind of a high stress situation where you got to get your kid out on the water and they're stressed. But I think it's important to note that there's a lot of people involved in the Opti class, such as yourself, that are passionate about the sport and willing to help these kids and make it happen for them.
Yep.
So I think time is up, and I want to say thank you, Brian, for taking the time to chat with us. I think adding your perspective into this backyard sailing series is great, because it gives a little bit of a spotlight into some of the corners of Opti sailing that a lot of people don't get to see. And hopefully we'll be able to visit and do a factory tour for all the Opti TV viewers, which I think will be very interesting and very informative. So, Brian, thanks again for sitting down with us, and be safe.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Glad to talk with you, and I love your office set up there, and we look forward to seeing you when you come up and visit.
So what do you guys think? Hope you guys like this video. And now you know a little bit more about Brian and McLaughlin Boat Works. Next time you see Brian at the boat park, make sure to say hi. And if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe because we've got more Opti content coming your way. This has been Alberto for Opti TV.